In the last section, we generated a new project using Create React App. After it generated the project successfully, we then scrolled up a little bit and saw a message right here that said that we had to install 1,700 separate packages. In this video, I want to start to understand why we had to install so many packages just to run a React application and build one on our local computer. All right, so we're going to take a look at a couple different diagrams really quickly. So you and I just used Create React App to generate a new React project. Inside this React project are a ton of different dependencies that are going to help us properly write our application. I want to focus on one particular dependency because it's going to help you understand why we had to install so much software. So the name of the dependency that I want to focus on is Babel right here. Now, the term Babel might be familiar to you. I'm going to give you a quick overview on what Babel is and why we use it, and why it's included inside of our Create React App installation. All right, so quick little aside here. As you've been learning JavaScript over the last couple months, weeks, years, or whatever it might be, you've probably been learning a version of JavaScript called ES5. And chances are you've also picked up a couple of features out of something called ES 2015 as well. ES5 and ES 2015s are references to a version of JavaScript. Each version of JavaScript has a very particular set of features and syntax available to it. There are different versions of this ES spec for every year after 2015. So again, chances are you've learned a little bit about ES 2015. There's also an ES 2016, 17, 18, 19, and so on. And every one of these different features, or excuse me, different versions, has some number of new features and upgrades to the JavaScript language. Now, the important thing to understand here is that these updates to the language are generally for the benefit of developers like you and I. In other words, if we can make use of, say, ES 2017 JavaScript and use all the features in here and previous years as well, we're going to have a really good time because these newer versions of JavaScript have new syntax, new features available that makes your life and my life as developers a lot easier. So as much as possible, you and I want to run these newer versions of JavaScript. However, there's a little bit of an issue with this. So the JavaScript that you and I write has to eventually be executed on our user's browser. Remember, we ship down a JavaScript file to their browser, and the browser has to execute the JavaScript inside there. Now, certain browsers are not always held 100% up to date. At present, just about every single modern browser out there has excellent support for ES5 JavaScript. In other words, if you and I write ES5 JavaScript code, we can send it out to just about any version of browser, and that code is going to be executed just fine. The same is almost true of ES 2015 as well. All the new updates to JavaScript included in ES 2015 can generally be executed and handled by every modern browser. But as we start to look at later years, like 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 20, not all browsers, and barely any browsers for more recent years, have support for the changes to JavaScript that are included in those years. So we're essentially in a little bit of a conflict here. On the one hand, you and I want to use later years or later versions because they make our lives easy as developers, but on the flip side, our users cannot actually run the code that we're writing because their browsers do not support it. So in order to get around this, we make use of a tool called Babel. Babel is a command line tool that can take any version of JavaScript and spit out a newer version. So this right here is a diagram of what might happen if we don't use a tool like Babel. You and I might write some ES 2015 code inside of some JavaScript files and then send it down to some browser with no guaranteed ES 2015 support. If we did that, our code might completely fail to run on the user's browser, and they probably won't see any content when they visit our web page. They'll probably just see a completely blank page or something like that. So with Babel, you and I write our ES 2015 or 2016, 2017, and so on code, and then we feed it into this command line tool called Babel, and Babel spits out a ES5 version of our code, or a version of our JavaScript code that is going to be safely executed on just about any browser in existence. So that's the job of Babel. And like I said, Babel is included by default anytime that we generate a new React project. Internally, Babel consists of a tremendous number of different packages. And so that at least partially explains why we are seeing this very large number of packages installed when we generated our project. Now, there's definitely other dependencies inside of this project as well. Other things such as Webpack and Webpack Dev Server. We'll talk about the purpose of these other files over time, or these other dependencies over time, but for right now, I just want you to understand that we have these different dependencies inside of our project, and that's why you're seeing that tremendous number of dependencies, or the large count of them, when we've just generated our project. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit more about Create React App, let's continue in the next section, and we're going to start looking at the contents of the project that we just generated.